The TV news reported an incredible event that will go down in history. The previously sent Apollo 11 landed on the moon. The screen showed a close-up of the one-man crew slowly descending to the lunar surface, step by step. These steps marked the beginning of a new era in human history. People have a hero who left the first traces in such an unknown space as space. A man-made robot with artificial intelligence has been announced as the first astronaut to reach the moon. In 1995, towards the end of his life, Einstein announced the long-awaited completion of his theory of the universe. Soon, humanity made a big breakthrough in the field of science. Exactly 1 year later, the United World Assembly announced the 3 laws of robotics to control created artificial intelligence and guide legislation. Gradually, the need for human workers began to disappear, and they were replaced by robots. Sometime later, almost 80% of the population no longer needed work. In 1997, after many major scientific advances, the world economy entered a golden age. The tractor dumped all the garbage into one large pile, which could indicate that someone's home had been here some time ago. Our hero was fond of drawing and did not miss the opportunity to capture everything that caught his attention. And now he was watching the tractor in action, sitting a little away from it and sketching all the details. While drawing, Sam didn't notice how quickly time was passing around him. Suddenly, a large doll-like object flew into the pile of garbage. This caught the hero's attention, causing him to flinch in surprise. Taking a closer look, he realized that it was a broken robot. The next moment, an idea came to him. At the same time, in her laboratory, the woman was studying the news about a new virus that was sweeping all sectors of the world. One clear symptom of this virus was coughing up blood. Suddenly, the door to the room opened and her grandson's voice reached her. Looking up from the screen, Louise turned to the boy, asking what had happened. Sam said with a happy smile that he had found something amazing. Louise, not understanding what caused such a violent reaction from the guy, asked what exactly he found. He turned sideways to her, showing the broken robot. Seeing him, the woman told Sam to weigh him. Then she would pay him for the scrap metal. But the hero objected that he was not here for that at all. He pointed to the robot's hands, saying that they were moving. Afterwards, Louise came closer and, taking a closer look, said that she could give him more for a functioning power source. But Sam again objected, asking her to save this robot. The woman was very surprised by her grandson's request. He begged her to fulfill his request because she was good at fixing things. Taking out a new cigarette, Louise asked if he had money. The hero replied that he would never force his grandmother to work for free and pressed the button on the watch. After he displayed his score on the screen, Sam showed it to her, saying that it was all he had. She froze for a moment when she saw his balance. After giving him a slap on the head, she said that for 1,500 marks he wouldn't even buy a hamburger. A few days later, a head was attached to the robot and some non-functional parts were replaced. Sam came to inspect his robot after a long 3 days of waiting. He asked his grandmother what the robot had with a face. She replied that this part was the most expensive, and if he wanted to put on a different face, then let him pay for it himself. After her words, the guy again turned his attention to the robot, and having examined it more carefully, asked why all robots wear the same clothes. Louise replied that this is required by law in order to distinguish them from people. Suddenly, the robot's eyes began to glow. A couple of moments later, the robot girl began to slowly rise, which made our hero very happy. After looking around, the robot asked where she was, because she was sure that they had gotten rid of her earlier. The hero sat down opposite her, and taking her hand in his palms, said that he was very glad that she was alive. The robot looked at him for a couple of seconds, and then asked if he was her new owner. The guy nodded and told her his name. When he asked her name, she didn't understand what the guy meant and gave her model number. Sam cocked his head to the side, saying it was too weird a name. Then he looked around. On the table, the hero noticed a package of chocolate. The next moment, he snapped his fingers, screaming that this was perfect. Then he turned to the robot and said that from now on he would call her Jane. Louise said that her work is finished, and now the guy can take the robot and leave, because she has a lot of work left. After thanking her, the hero headed for the exit, saying that next time he will have enough money to buy a new face for Jane. The woman stood without turning around all this time, waiting until the door slammed on the other side. When Sam left, a suppressed cough broke out. After the attack passed, Louise saw that her entire palm was covered in blood. She realized that the symptoms of the virus had appeared, and she didn't have much time left. Sam returned with Jane to his house. Having started to sort out the rubbish that had accumulated inside for quite a long time, she accidentally broke a plate. The hero looked away from the canvas and asked if everything was okay with the robot. She apologized and started cleaning up the pieces. The guy who stood up replied that she shouldn't worry about it, because he found it in a landfill, and it wasn't of much value. Having settled down next to her, Sam began to help her, and in the process asked Jane to call him something else, and not master. She didn't have time to answer anything when she accidentally touched a mountain of rubbish behind her, after which everything fell to the floor. Sam just screamed that it was amazing. Inspecting the resulting mess, he said that he had long dreamed of cleaning it all up. Jane apologized to him, saying that her neural network parameters were damaged, so her motor functions were very limited. She was very upset that at the moment it would be very difficult for her to be useful for her master. The hero replied that everything was fine and nothing needed to be done for him. After his words, Jane approached him and quoted one of the laws, which states that a robot cannot allow people to get hurt due to its negligence. She explained that following this law, it is necessary to get rid of robots that are not able to help the owner for one reason or another. The guy looked at her in surprise when she told him to get rid of her if she stopped being useful to him. He scratched his head, saying that he had not studied these laws before. Afterwards, he asked for some time to think. A few minutes later, he got a great idea. The hero said that he wants to see Jane smile. She looked at him with confusion. The guy explained that now this is impossible because of her doll head. Then he translated the image from the clock, saying that he had a plan to implement his idea. Sam showed her an advertisement for an upcoming art competition in 3 months and told her that the grand prize would be enough to buy her a new face. After listening to him, Jane said that she was not able to smile. Even she would have a face suitable for this. The hero didn't let her finish, asking how she knew this if she hadn't even tried. He said he was looking forward to seeing her smile. Taking her hand, the hero smiled softly and said that he believed that Jane would succeed. Afterwards, he stood up and, stretching, asked if she had any ideas worthy of first place. She thought for a few seconds. A moment later, Jane spoke about his request earlier, informing him that one of the laws forbade her to address the owner by his name. Raising her head, she asked if Mr. Sam could address him. The guy smiled, answering that this option suits him. In the evening, they headed to the landfill together, collecting things that interested the hero. That night, they fell asleep together. The days passed by. Sometimes they visited Louise, helping her with the cleaning. In the evenings, Sam spent his time drawing, trying to draw something worthy of first place. Louise spent these days conducting her research, waiting for the disease to finally get the better of her. On one of these days, her grandson burst into her laboratory with joyful cries. Showing her his award for the competition, he said that he managed to take first place. The woman looked in surprise at the joyful boy. When he asked if he could now buy a new face for Jane, Louise just smiled. A week later, the robot's face was changed from a doll's to a human's. The hero was beside himself with joy. Looking at herself in the mirror, Jane assumed that some kind of mistake had occurred because her eyes and face shape looked strange. But Sam convinced her otherwise. He reminded her of his request earlier and asked her to try to smile. Jane had difficulty controlling her facial expressions and, squeezing out some distant semblance of a smile, asked if this was what the hero meant. The guy didn't know what to answer her and could only stand silently. When she tried a new expression, he admitted that it looked very creepy. A sudden cough behind him caught his attention, and Sam turned to Louise. Seeing that my grandmother sat down on the floor, holding her hand on the table, he asked what happened to her. Sam wanted to touch her, but the woman shouted at him to move away from her. The next moment, she stood up and said that she was just a little tired, so she needed to rest a little, and it was time for Sam to go back. The hero looked at her doubtfully. Afterwards, he went outside with Jane, saying that if she needed anything, she could call him at any time. Having said this, the guy slammed the door. Left alone, Louise slowly walked towards the mirror, struggling with new coughing attacks. She leaned her hand on the mirror, smearing her blood on it. Raising her head, the woman saw that her eyes had already begun to turn red. Walking along the village, Sam shared his worries about the health of Grandma Jane. She walked behind him and practiced her smile. Noticing her upset expression, he said that she did not need to rush and force herself to smile, because smiling is a natural reaction to some event. Jane replied that she did not quite understand what exactly the hero was trying to convey to her. Sam stopped when he heard that she couldn't understand the concept of a smile. He tried to explain everything to her in more detail. After listening to him, Jane asked to get rid of her because she could not obey the only order of her master and was breaking one of the laws. The guy looked at her in surprise when she said that she was just a pile of scrap metal, the existence of which was devoid of any meaning. The hero couldn't listen to it anymore. He shouted at her to shut up. With his head bowed, Sam told her to listen carefully to what he was about to tell her. When the robot heard that despite what the law dictates to them, her owner would never leave her, she was sincerely surprised. Saying this, the hero remembered his painful past. A few years ago, his mother packed her things and wanted to leave. He tried to stop her, but received only another resounding slap in the face. The boy lay with tears in his eyes and watched as his mother turned around and left somewhere forever. That day, he sat outside the door for a very long time, hoping not that she would change her mind and come back. Coming out of the memories, the hero looked into Jane's eyes, saying that he does not abandon his family members. Then he asked her to never say that about herself again. He folded his hands on his chest and added that if he heard again that he needed to get rid of her, he would be very offended. Stunned, Jane stood for several seconds before answering a word. Suddenly, Sam started bleeding from his nose. The robot girl, who did not expect this, watched this in surprise. A second later, she leaned towards her equally surprised master, asking what had happened. But Sam was unable to answer her due to a sudden bout of coughing up blood. He fell to his knees, coughing up blood. A few minutes later, the hero lost consciousness, and the robot girl put him on her back. She activated navigation mode to find the nearest hospital. A couple of seconds later, Jane received the necessary data and immediately headed in the indicated direction. Suddenly, something caught her attention. Wary, she decided to stop. The street ahead was on fire and people turned into monsters and devoured each other. Some tried to escape from the crowd of zombies, but eventually they overtook their victims. One of the men who contacted tried to break into the telephone booth of his victims. Jane turned to the system to find out the details of what was happening around her. She waited for several seconds to connect to the central database. Suddenly, heavy footsteps were heard behind her and Jane turned around. A zombie was approaching them. The robot decided to scan the person in front of it. She walked throughout the body, collecting data. A moment later, it was determined that the creature was no longer human. Jane realized that he and his kind posed a serious threat to her master. The zombie has virtually no traces of human DNA, which gave her a free hand. Jane finished gathering information, closing her eyes. A moment later, her bracelet began to glow. She said that all elements that pose a threat to humans must be eliminated immediately. Surrounding sounds began to reach the unconscious Sam. A couple of seconds later, with great effort, he managed to open his eyes. He wanted to say something, but he couldn't come out with anything other than a wheeze. Having given up these attempts, he paid attention to what was happening around him. The houses were on fire, the street was strewn with dead bodies of people, while others behaved strangely and bit others. Suddenly, there was an explosion somewhere nearby, and the flames ignited with renewed vigor. This attracted the attention of the zombies. They broke away from their victims and headed in the direction where the explosion had been heard a second ago. Louise watched what was happening through the window of her house. The woman put out another half-smoked cigarette. The day she feared most had arrived. Louise pushed aside the desk drawer with the pistol inside. Taking it in her hands, she pointed the trigger to her temple, and the next second a shot rang out. At the same time, Jane was still standing opposite the zombie with Sam on her back. He slowly approached his victim. When Jane was about to get rid of the threat, the hero managed to squeeze out the words that she could not do this and extended his hand to her clenched fist. The guy reminded her of the law prohibiting harming people. Although the words were given to the hero with great difficulty, he was obliged to stop her, because robots that violate the law he mentioned are destroyed. Sam asked Jane to promise him that she would never harm people. All this time, the robot girl looked at him in surprise. A moment later, she threw the guy to the ground. Sam didn't understand what caused Jane's reaction, but the next second she asked him who he was. The hero asked with confusion what she meant. The robot girl explained that she was unable to identify either his voice or his iris. Scanning the guy once again, she was unable to obtain any information about him, after which she announced that she would classify Sam as another dangerous specimen. Jane was sure that the guy lying in front of her was not her master, so she turned around, saying that she had to find him. The amazed Sam looked at his robot, not believing what was happening. He was able to call out to her only when she moved a few meters away from him, but Jane did not pay any attention to him, continuing to look for her master. Suddenly, Sam had another coughing fit. A couple of moments later, he heard footsteps approaching him and looked up to see who it was. The next second, he saw a crowd of zombies approaching him. At the same time, Jane ran further and further down the street in search of the real Sam. She suddenly stopped when she noticed something strange. A couple of meters away from her stood the same robot girl, and the man sitting in front of her asked her for help. She also scanned him to verify his identity, just as Jane had done earlier. A couple of seconds later, the robot girl said that the man was not her master, after which she lost all interest in the man calling out to her. She went in search of her owner, gradually moving away from this place. Jane turned around when she heard another robot's voice behind her. Nearby, a robotic man sat next to the body of his dead owner. Closing her eyes, he said that, following the law to ensure the confidentiality of the owner in the event of death, all data on the robot must be deleted. Within a few seconds, automatic erasure of all data will begin. Looking around, Jane discovered many robots similar to her, in search of their owners and those who were preparing to erase all data. Sometime later, she reached the house where she and Sam had lived all this time. Opening the front door, the robot girl stepped into an unlit room. Having scanned everything inside, she discovered that there was no one here except her. Suddenly, something caught her attention. Jen looked at the wall covered with Sam's drawings. Memories of the hero asking her to pose flashed through her mind. She stood for several minutes at this wall. Suddenly, she remembered Louise's house, where her master might be, and headed there. Sometime later, Jane approached our hero's grandmother's house. When she entered the house, it was unusually quiet inside. The robot girl went deeper into the house, exploring each of the rooms, and in one of them she discovered a dead body. Jane stopped to scan it and get information about the identity of the person in front of her. Having established her identity, she walked over and sat down next to Louise. Jane remembered what Louise had told her when she changed her face. The woman said that Sam's mother abandoned him when he was 5 years old, which is why he now sympathizes with Jane, because someone abandoned her too. Louise sighed heavily and continued, saying that she had become not just some machine for the guy, but the family that he valued more than anything in the world. She then asked Jane to stay by Sam's side no matter how much he might change. The robot girl covered the dead body with a found sheet. After confirming Louise's death, she returned to searching for Sam. A minute later, she left the house thinking about possible options for her master's location. Jane stopped walking down the stairs. Several zombies were approaching her. When she turned around, intending to go in a different direction, the zombies immediately attacked her. She managed to dodge one of them. Jane decided to remove the obstacle. Gathering all the strength in her fist, she rushed at the zombies. But a guy suddenly jumped out and blocked her path. Jane scanned the man who stopped her, trying to determine his identity. The robot girl noticed that he had a biological signature similar to Sam's. Suddenly, the hero let out a roar. The guy tried to drive other zombies away from Jane in a similar way. His idea was a success, and a couple of moments later, the zombies turned around and headed in an unknown direction. Jane watched what was happening in surprise. At some point, the guy's growl became quieter, and small tremors began to break through his body. The hero desperately tried to pronounce the words, while he still had the ability to control his own consciousness, which was gradually becoming clouded with fog. After several attempts, he managed to ask if Jane was okay. He slowly turned towards the wary robot girl, saying that he had something important to tell her. She scanned his voice and iris again, but received the same information as before. The man's identity was impossible to determine. Sam continued to approach her. He said that he wouldn't last long, so he had to have time to tell her. A few seconds later, he managed to take Jane's hand. After that, he said that the last 3 months that they spent together, he was truly happy because he had a family. All this time, the robot carried out various checks to establish his identity, but they all gave Jane the same answer. Suddenly, Sam was overcome with weakness and fell to his knees, the robot supporting him by his arms, preventing his torso from collapsing to the ground. Jen recalled various moments and desperately tried to convince herself that the guy in front of her was not her master. But his words and attitude towards her were no different from the real Sam. At some point, unconsciously to herself, she began to cry. Sinking to the ground, Jane hugged the guy, recognizing him as her master. She called his name, expecting some kind of response. Her tears fell onto Sam's face. The robot girl lowered her head over his, asking him to look at her face. She wanted him to see her smile, which she finally got after so many attempts. But the hero did not have any reaction. The virus finally took over his body. The next moment, he rose from Jane's lap and was about to bite her. She just watched the guy with tears frozen in her eyes. When he did bite her, Jen only squeezed Sam tighter in her arms. The guy tried to bite her hand, but was defeated over and over again. Due to an unknown virus on this day, the world's population decreased by 70%. An alliance of governments around the world immediately formed an organization to combat this virus and ensure safety by identifying the root cause of its occurrence. After research by the World Health Organization, it was stated that the DNA structure of zombies is significantly different from the DNA of an ordinary person. When the infection rate increased significantly and the government did nothing, people began demonstrating in front of the government building to demand a solution to the problem. Thus, more than 200 days have passed since the appearance of the virus, and the zombie ratio has exceeded 70% of the world's population. People could only believe that scientists would soon figure out a way to get rid of this disease. 230 days have passed since Sam was infected. Jane was checking out the necessary products at the checkout in the nearest store, which still had at least some food left. In the first 3 days, she heard on the news that the virus had spread throughout the world. But now that the network is turned off, she cannot find out news from outside. After putting the groceries into a bag, she thanked the former zombie salesman. He only let out an inarticulate wheeze. Jane assumed that other robots ceased functioning after losing their master, or they went somewhere else continuing the search. In this village of robots, she was the only one left. She was tormented by questions about what the situation was in the outside world and whether there was a cure for this disease. Suddenly, she heard a scream behind her and turned around. A man she didn't know was running away from zombies. Greg lamented his luck because he was supposed to land on the roof, but the wind picked up at the most inopportune moment. Suddenly, he tripped over the parachute ropes on his back and fell. The zombie decided to take advantage of this opportunity and rushed at his victim. Greg had already prepared himself for the fact that he was about to be bitten and closed his eyes. But when no pain followed after a few seconds of waiting, he opened his eyes, not understanding what had happened. Turning around, he saw that someone was blocking the zombie's path, protecting him. The stranger who saved him took his place, becoming the new victim of a zombie who was about to bite her. The man watched this in horror. He should not have allowed this situation to happen. His mission was a failure before it even began, because the only survivor in this sector would turn into another zombie after some time. Unexpectedly for Greg, the girl turned around and asked if he was okay. Getting up from the ground, he replied that now was not the right time to take care of others. Before it was too late, she should let him examine the bite site to prevent the spread of the virus. Before he could finish speaking, a dozen more zombies approached them. Greg knew they weren't in a winning situation right now. Jane suddenly approached him, having previously apologized for disturbing him. The next moment, she took the man in her arms, holding him as if he weighed almost nothing. Jane rushed past all the zombies surrounding them at lightning speed. Only then did Greg notice her clothes and appearance. He made a mistake at the very beginning, mistaking a domestic robot for a human. In this way, she ran through several streets. Stopping in a safe place, she asked if the man was injured, but he asked to be lowered to the ground. She complied with his request. Greg turned away for a couple of seconds, struggling with embarrassment from the fact that the girl, albeit a robot, was carrying him in her arms. Afterwards, he told her that he was a member of the UN, a junior officer. Jane replied that she was pleased to meet him and also introduced herself. Greg said that they spotted a survivor in the sector from satellite imagery, and that's why he was sent here to help him, and then asked if she knew anything about it. Jane apologized and replied that she did not understand his question. From what he had seen earlier, there were quite a lot of people around. The robot girl began asking a lot of clarifying questions, making the man regret the question he asked earlier. He stopped her, asking her to just take him to her master. When Jane agreed to his request, Greg breathed a sigh of relief. He knew that robots could not recognize zombies as their master. Greg assumed that since this robot was still here, then there was only one person left who was not infected. The man was watching Jane carefully when she suddenly smiled. Greg stopped and asked in surprise if he thought she had just smiled. Jane turned around and answered him with a smile that she was happy now, because 230 days had passed since the guest appeared here. Greg looked at her in bewilderment. He was sure that robots could not smile, much less experience any emotions. A few minutes later, they arrived at Sam's house. Going inside, Jane informed her master that she had returned, after which she walked towards the guy sitting by the canvas, leading Greg behind her. When the man spoke, the hero reacted to the stranger's appearance and turned in their direction. Seeing his face, Greg took a step back in horror. At the same moment, Sam rushed at him. Jane grabbed the guy by the torso, preventing him from attacking the man. She said that this man came here to help them, but the guy did not react to her words, trying to escape from her grip. Greg grabbed the weapon, pointing it at Sam. The man did not understand what this robot was doing. He asked if her original plan was to lure him here and make him zombie food. Jane replied that she understood why he thought this way and asked him to calm down and listen to her. But Greg was not going to listen to her any further and interrupted and said that he would kill this zombie. After his words, Sam's gaze changed. Jane asked that they listen to her first and said that her master would not do anything bad to Greg. Sam understands what she is saying. The man objected that this could not be true. The robot girl reminded him of one of the laws, which clearly states that robots cannot lie to people in any situation. Afterwards, she slowly let the guy go, saying that he would no longer attack. The man watched in surprise as Sam actually stopped trying to attack and just stood there while small tremors ran through his body. A moment later, the guy looked at the man calmly. Confused, Greg hesitantly lowered the gun. A few hours later, the sky began to take on the pink hues of sunset. Happy Jane was setting the table. Greg felt awkward having dinner with the zombie sitting opposite him, who was watching the man with interest. At one point, he turned to Jane, saying that he had never seen a zombie understand someone's words before. He asked if she used any means on the guy, or if she was using some special frequency that only zombies could understand. Jane replied that Sam used to bite her whenever possible. He also could not eat normal food and constantly threw everything around, making a mess. She was reassured by the fact that those infected did not die or become weaker, even if they did not eat. But one day she noticed something strange. Her master began to eat living creatures like rats. Because of his illness, he became more violent, and Jane did not know how to care for him in this condition. But after 3 months, the violent actions decreased, and he gradually began to understand her words. Now Sam can understand simple communication. Stretching out her hands to him, she said that at the moment, she herself did not know why her master's condition was gradually improving. Hugging him, Jane said that she believed that this virus could be destroyed and the affected people healed. Greg listened in amazement to the robot girl's story. She was silent for a couple of seconds, after which she looked up at him, in which some hope was read. This was the first time the man had heard of someone believing that this was just a disease from which one could be cured. He tried to understand the reason why this robot perceives zombies as people. Suddenly, she asked if she could ask Greg one question. Having received his approving nod, Jane asked what the situation was in the outside world. The man replied that the situation outside has not changed much. The number of zombies is constantly increasing. Although scientists are conducting an in-depth study of the virus, they have not been able to make any progress in anything. He said that the government is inactive, and now everyone understands that they are in a hopeless situation, and such a thing as hope has long left them. Jane listened to his story in horror. After a short pause, Greg continued, saying that this was exactly the situation a month ago. But now everything is different. The government has finally presented a plan that can help solve the current situation. Rising from the table, the man said that he couldn't share much at the moment. The only thing he was sure of and what he could promise her was that within 6 months, they would be able to deal with the virus and put an end to it all. He then sat down next to Sam, saying that he was a special case. The man was not sure whether the boy could be healed, but if Jane sent him to a medical laboratory, then there she would definitely be able to get a definite answer. Opening the front door, he promised that as soon as he returned, he would send a rescue team here, so they would only have to wait a little. After his words, Jane bowed, thanking him for his help. When Greg got outside, it was already deep night. Taking out the photo, he was disappointed that there was no survivor here after all. And the one spotted from the satellite turned out to be an ordinary household robot capable of smiling. The current situation might even seem funny to him if it weren't so serious. The call he received distracted him from his thoughts. When Greg answered the call, he was asked to report on the situation. He said that as a result of searches in this sector, no survivors were found. The image they received from the satellite belonged to a domestic robot. At the same time, Jane tried to wash Sam, who tried to resist her, but she smiled and tried to explain to him the importance of this process. Looking up from the report, Greg noticed someone approaching from the side. Noticing his target, the zombie attacked him, but the man reacted faster, and the next moment he shot at the zombie. As he approached, he shot several more times at the dead body. Greg thought for a couple of seconds, remembering today's events. After stepping on the dead zombie's head, he said that there was no more important information worth sharing. The man concluded his report by saying that there was only a defective robot that mistakes zombies for people. After listening to him, the officer said that in this case, they could count it as a violation of the law on robot vagrancy. Then he said that the punitive detachment was currently carrying out a cleanup operation 500 kilometers from this sector. They will immediately be given an order to destroy all monsters in Greg's sector. A couple of moments later, they contacted the commander of the punitive squad, providing the coordinates. Unsuspecting, Jane and Sam were enjoying their time in the bathroom. The next morning, the punitive detachment moved towards its next target. At the same time, Sam was scratching the wall with a stationary knife. Jane, who was cleaning, looked at him excitedly. The hero didn't pay attention to anything, carefully applying new scratches to the wall. At some point, Jane approached him and took the knife, asking him to be careful. When the knife was in her hands, the robot girl decided to pay attention to the wall. Raising her eyes, she froze in amazement for several seconds. Sam scratched her picture on the wall. She turned her gaze to the guy and joyfully asked him if he portrayed her. The hero nodded his head, confirming her guess. Jane looked at the image again with delight. Sometime later, she went to the store. While choosing various objects to draw, the robot girl beamed with happiness because her master had shown interest in something for the first time. It seemed to her that the damaged parts of the brain were beginning to recover, and the disease began to gradually recede. That is why, for the first time, she felt that she was flying home on the wings of happiness. She covered most of the distance by making long jumps. A sudden sound caught her attention. Raising her head up, Jane saw several planes flying past. She thought that this was the same rescue unit that Greg had told her about. But a moment later, scanning the passing plane, she realized that something was wrong. This model is clearly not used as a rescue aircraft. Her eyes widened in surprise as the realization dawned on Jane that they were being used for bombing. A couple of seconds later, the village was attacked and terrifying explosions were heard everywhere. Zombies burned alive in the flames that engulfed everything around them. Jane was thrown aside by the force of the explosion. She hit her face and fell to the ground. Slowly rising, the robot requested access to the database, trying to find out at least something about what was happening now. Sudden gunshots and zombie screams caught her attention, forcing her to turn around. What she saw made her freeze for several moments. Armed robots emerged from the raging flames. Jane recognized the model immediately. These robots have been manufactured for 12 years for the most dangerous military operations. She didn't understand why military robots were sent here, because there were only sick people here. Suddenly, they opened fire. The robots got rid of the zombies without any delay. Jane was confused, because earlier she had been informed about the arrival of a rescue squad, but not a punitive one. She began to analyze all the data she had received since Greg arrived with them. His words about salvation turned out to be a lie. Jane also remembered that the man was collecting information about possible survivors here. She realized what exactly it was. That same countermeasure in relation to solving the problem with the virus. Greg meant by this the complete destruction of the source of infection. Jane realized that her master was in danger. A couple of minutes later, she was approaching their house. Noticing the broken door, her excitement intensified. A moment later, she noticed someone else's footprints left at the front door. Jane ran into the house, hoping Sam wasn't hurt. However, as soon as she was inside, she saw a military robot with a pistol in his hands. Looking at Sam standing against the wall, Jane was convinced that he was alive and unharmed. Then she turned her gaze to the military robot. It was obvious that she had no chance of winning if she went into battle with him. But even realizing this, Jane was obliged to protect her master. The robot girl attacked the enemy, striking him in the head. At the very last moment, the military robot reacted and grabbed her wrist. For a couple of seconds, Jane was grabbed and hung in the air. It took the military robot a couple of moments to identify the model of the robot that attacked him, after which he said that following the laws, the robotic home must be eliminated. A moment later, the robot attacked Jane, intending to destroy her. At the same moment, the final percentage of her victory was completed, which was only 1,000th. As she fell to the floor, she noticed the frightened expression on Sam's face. Even if her body is torn to pieces, she must protect it. Analyzing everything that had just happened, she remembered that without violating certain articles, the robot could protect itself. At the moment when Jane attacked the military robot, the third section was applied to her. Therefore, her opponent will not rest until she is completely destroyed. She was completely satisfied that the military robot's attention would be focused entirely on her. The next moment, she released her hand from his grip. Then she turned around in the air. Jane strove towards Sam, who was standing opposite the window. When she finally caught up with him, the military robot aimed his weapon at them. But Jane managed to jump through the window with her master, avoiding the bullets. Despite her successful escape, she had suffered severe damage to her chest and energy core a few minutes earlier. If Jane does not receive repairs in the next 8 hours, her functions will stop. But even realizing this, the robot girl was ready to sacrifice everything to help Sam escape. At the same time, the punitive detachment was finishing the bombardment of this sector. The man sitting in the cockpit received information about how their mission was progressing. Suddenly, he received a message that an object was moving at high speed towards the outside of the sector, after which an image was displayed in which Greg recognized the already familiar defective robot. When he was informed that 10 military robots would be sent in pursuit, he said that it was not worth wasting his time on it. Greg intended to deal with this robot himself. A couple of moments later, 2 planes caught up with Jane and Sam. Hearing a noise approaching, she turned around. At the same moment, Greg gave the order to attack her. His order was immediately carried out. Jane was unable to avoid this attack and suffered another injury to her back. She fell to the ground along with her master. Hearing footsteps approaching from behind, Jane turned around. The robot girl was surprised when she again saw the person who had deceived her earlier. Greg, who was standing, told the military robot that they must destroy all the zombies and eliminate objects that interfere with this. Hearing this, Jane looked at him displeased. She already understood that the plan regarding the virus that he told her then was to destroy all those infected. But she did not give up trying to convince the man that the disease could still be cured, judging by the improving condition of its owner. When Jane asked that Sam be shown to the medical team, Greg replied that there was no point. He said that there is no other way to get rid of this virus. After the virus began to spread massively and the government made no attempt, the press began to spread a lot of negative news. Every day, many articles appeared about the predetermined end of the world, and soon fear settled in people. Ultimately, they began to demand the complete destruction of zombies by organizing continuous rallies. The government could not cope with the hostility of the public, and soon they conducted an official survey around the world on whether the complete destruction of zombies would be carried out. According to the results, it was revealed that the overwhelming majority voted for destruction, which is why he does not have the right to leave Sam alive. She said that she still could not understand the reason for such cruelty. Covering the hero with herself, Jane said that the infected are people just like him. The robot girl didn't understand how people could treat others like that. Exhaling cigarette smoke, Greg asked who exactly she meant by people. Without waiting for an obvious answer from her, he said that no one perceives zombies as people. The man explained that these are only animals that spread a deadly disease. After his words, Jane looked at Sam doubtfully. Greg said that she should know about this better than them, because she is a robot. She looked at her master for a few seconds before answering that she really couldn't recognize Sam as a person. Taking the guy by the hand, she continued, saying that this is only a biological problem, but the fact that her owner remains himself does not change. When Jane said that Sam was still her family, he looked at her in surprise. She clearly remembered the words he had once said to her. Lost in her memories, Jane did not notice how the hand of the robot approaching her was slowly reaching out to her. The next moment, a powerful electric discharge ran through her. Greg threw away the half-smoked cigarette. He even felt a little sorry for this domestic robot. He was sure that she would not have met such an end if she had not been so blindly devoted to her master. It was just a false emotion that was put into her. Afterwards, he ordered the robots to continue the further operation. Having given instructions, the man turned around, heading towards his plane. The remaining military robot threw Jane's immobilized body aside and stood in front of Sam, pistol in hand. He aimed the weapon at the guy's head, intending to get rid of him, but he began to try to say something. The hero reached out to Jane, who was lying a couple of steps away from him, but she did not show any signs of life. At the same time, Jane's mind flashed back to Layla telling her to remain family to Sam, no matter how much he would change in the future. She expected that they would face many difficulties in the future. That is why Layla gave her a special power with which Jane had to protect Sam. A few moments later, the robot girl received a notification that the update download was complete. After that, her body rose up and she was engulfed in a golden glow. This caught the attention of Greg, who had already decided that he was done with her. He barely had time to turn around when half the body of a military robot appeared at his feet. Jane managed to deal with the robot that attacked her in the blink of an eye. The stunned man stood there, trying to comprehend what exactly had just happened. The robot girl decided for herself that from now on, anyone who poses a threat to her master must be destroyed. The hero himself looked at her in surprise. The military robots took up a defensive position, holding their weapons at the ready. Jane came to Sam's defense. Greg didn't understand how this was even possible, because just a minute ago she had been taken out of action. Looking at the robot lying in front of him, many questions appeared in his head one after another. Meanwhile, Jane unfastened one of the buttons on her suit. After the mechanism was activated, a protective dome surrounded the guy. When Sam began to panic, not understanding what had happened, she explained that this dome was intended to protect him, and he just needed to wait a little while she dealt with the enemies. Greg ordered the military robots to destroy Jane as quickly as possible, but not even a couple of seconds had passed before their heads were blown off. The shocked man did not even have time to understand what happened. Turning around, he saw Jane standing with the head of one of the military robots in her hand. He was amazed at her speed. Coming to his senses, he asked how this was possible. He couldn't understand how an ordinary robot got so many fighting skills, but she ignored his question, turning in the opposite direction. Then she ran in an unknown direction. According to the data that Jane received, it was established that there were several more squads of military zombies in the center. They have already destroyed almost half of the infected, and they have enough chances to become a threat to its owner. Jane was determined to incapacitate each of them. At some point, the military robot sensed someone approaching from behind and turned around. Jane blew off the head of one of them before the robots had time to react and began to attack her. The next moment, she knocked out another one with a kick. One military robot hid among the ruins and aimed at Jane from a safe distance. A moment later, there was a deafening explosion. The robot was confident that it had gotten rid of its target. Contrary to his expectations, Jane was already above him. She landed directly on him, thereby destroying the enemy's body. Greg at this time received endless messages about losses. He was shocked that an entire battalion was destroyed in 10 minutes by just one faulty house robot. Having gotten rid of all the military robots, Jane headed back to him. Greg commanded that the hangar administrator module be launched. The military, who had set up a camp nearby, received a message from their commander and unlocked hangar number 6. A robot of impressive size appeared from behind the open door, after which he was given an order to eliminate his target. Meanwhile, Jane rushed back to her master. Greg panicked when he noticed her approach. He shouted for the sent robot to hurry up. A couple of moments later, Jane's path was blocked by a new enemy. The man was glad that this robot arrived on time. Even if it is shameful for a robot of his level to fight with some domestic robot, but with his combat power, Greg will be able to get rid of Jane. At the same time, she studied the enemy, trying to discover weak points. The next moment, Jane struck him with a blow that caused his body to shatter into pieces. Greg was once again shocked by what happened. Not believing his eyes, he looked at what was left of the body of his best combat robot. He was brought out of his stupor by Jane's words that her mission was over and 116 robots had been eliminated. Now the man was looking at her in horror. When she started to approach, he shouted at her not to come near him. But seeing that Jane was not reacting to his words, he grabbed the gun. The next moment, Greg pointed the gun at Sam, hoping it would make her stop. But when this action had no effect, he voiced his intention to shoot the guy in the head. Jane just frowned, getting closer and closer with every step. Ultimately, Greg did shoot. But the barrier surrounding Sam did not allow the bullet to reach the guy, and the bullet flew in the opposite direction. The man was unable to dodge, and the bullet went through his thigh. Jane approached her master to remove the barrier. After turning to Greg, who was crumpled in pain, saying that people are afraid of the disease and abandon their fellow men. But she did not intend to act like them and would never give up her family. Turning around, Jane finally said that until the very end, she would look for a way to cure this disease, after which she headed off with Sam in an unknown direction, leaving Greg alone. Looking at the retreating backs, he felt that he was obliged to urgently inform his superiors about everything that had happened here today. A few hours later, Jane and Sam were at the grave. The robot girl thanked Louise for installing a system with which Jane managed to protect her master. She told her that she was going on a trip with Sam. Holding her gaze on the carved name, she continued, saying that they could no longer rely on outside help. Jane will look for a cure for Sam and will definitely cure him. When this happens, they will return here again. So she asked Louise to wait a little longer for them. Then they slowly set off. Along the way, Jane shared that she was thrilled to be traveling with her master for the first time and asked if he felt the same. Sam answered her, trying to express the same emotions. At that moment, she thought about Greg's first reaction when he first saw Sam. He was greatly surprised when he learned that her master was able to understand words. Greg wasn't lying when he said Sam was a special case. According to the data received, she knew that any type of virus accounts for another 1% of all humanity, and it is this 1% that has antibodies to the disease. Jane suggested that Sam was one of these people, and that in the future, he would become an important key in finding a cure. That is why their first task was to find the right person to confirm the presence of antibodies in her master. Suddenly, there was a noise from an airplane above them. Surprised, Jane immediately stopped. The discovery of an escaped zombie and a robot was reported. Jane managed to put a barrier around Sam while she fought the enemies. The robot girl was ready to challenge the whole world to protect her master. 15 days have passed since they left the village. Jane was surprised to find a barricade and they stopped a few meters away from it. It must have taken a lot of time to build something like that, and it was the question of when they managed to do it that haunted her. After scanning the area, Jane learned the location of defensive artillery structures, which are designed to block further advance of the infected. If they got too close to them, it wouldn't end well, so she decided they should go somewhere else. Looking at the sky, Jane assumed that it would start raining soon and they should hurry. A moment later, confirming her thought, the first drop fell from the sky. When they reached the nearest town, it was already pouring rain. Jane covered Sam with rain the whole way, but the rain was too heavy and the umbrella could do little to help them. Leaning over, she told her master that he didn't have to worry, and they would definitely find a place where they could wait out the rain. The guy was pointing his finger somewhere, trying to tell her something. Looking where Sam was pointing, Jane noticed the light of a lantern in one of the houses. She approached and knocked on the glass, asking if anyone was there. But instead of answering, the barrel of a gun appeared from behind the broken glass. A red-haired girl appeared and asked who the uninvited guests were. Jane said that she is a domestic robot and the girl need not be afraid of them. The owner of the gun was surprised that there were still robots in the area. Jane replied that she and her master were currently in the middle of a journey and saw a light here while passing by. When the hero raised his head, Maria drew attention to his eyes and pointed the gun at him. She asked Jane why she was dragging zombies around with her. The robot girl covered Sam with herself, answering that he was safe for others and did not attack anyone. But Maria fired a bullet at Jane, not allowing her to finish. She warned that if they came closer, she would definitely shoot again. Finally, the girl advised to get rid of this zombie as soon as possible. After her words, Jane's gaze filled with sadness. Sam was worried about her and reached out with his hand to the injured forehead of his only family member. Smiling, she said that she was fine and that this damage would be repaired automatically within 10 minutes. Moving away from this house, Jane took a last look at it. She had the opportunity to personally verify that people were really very afraid of the infected, but she could not leave everything as it was. Maria's younger sister excitedly asked if her sister had killed that girl, but she replied that it was a robot and it was impossible to kill her with a regular gun. When Anya said that Maria shot the robot in the head, the girl hesitantly replied that she only wanted to fire a warning shot and did not intend to intentionally hit her. Anya, no less worried, asked what they would do if the robot nevertheless presented them with the fact that she had been shot in the head. Maria, who was shooting for the first time in her life, was surprised by the strong recoil from the weapon she had previously selected. Looking out the window, the younger sister looked at the retreating backs, saying that she felt sorry for them. The girl handed Anya a chocolate bar, saying that now was not the best time to worry about others, but Anya replied that she was not hungry and Maria should eat it herself. But she insisted, saying that Anya had not eaten anything since yesterday. Her younger sister crossed her arms over her chest, answering that Maria herself had not eaten for 3 days. Thus they argued for some time. They were interrupted by Jane reappearing. Maria immediately grabbed her gun and pointed the gun at her and asked why she was here again. The robot girl raised her hands asking to be listened to. After that, she picked up a large box of food, saying that she couldn't pass by and decided to help them by collecting some food from the nearby market. Seeing this, the sisters could no longer think about anything other than the food in front of them. At this time, the sisters were enthusiastically gobbling up food on both cheeks. Anya thanked Jane with tears in her eyes, saying that they had not been able to eat properly for several days. She smiled and replied that there was still a lot of food left, and if they wanted something else, they could say so at any time. Drawing attention to Sam, who was standing with his back to them, the girl asked why he did not eat with them. Jane replied that he was sick and could not eat normal food at the moment. Frowning, Maria asked if she was planning to fatten them up so that she could later feed them to her master. Jane assured her that this was not the case. Anya did not take her interested gaze off Sam. She walked over and touched his back, getting his attention. A couple of seconds later, the surprised hero turned to her. Anya could not hide her joy. Her sister immediately jumped up from her seat, telling the girl to immediately move away from him. But she ignored her and, shaking Sam's hand, offered friendship. The guy hummed uncertainly. Alarmed, Maria repeated her request again, but in a more insistent voice. Dissatisfied, Anya turned to her sister, reminding her that Sam was not dangerous, then asked him if he would eat her. He shook his head negatively. The girl smiled happily, saying that he was friendly. Maria could hardly contain her emotions when her sister suggested how nice it would be if other zombies were like Sam and their mother remained alive. At dawn, the rain finally stopped. The zombies were still wandering around aimlessly. For the first time in a long time, Anya was able to sleep peacefully without nightmares. Maria patted her sister on the head and thanked Jane for her help. Smiling, she replied that she was also grateful to them, because it was the first time that her master looked like his former self. Removing her hand from Anya's hair, the girl asked Jane and Sam to leave them as soon as possible, causing the surprise of her guest. Taking a photo from the shelf, Maria explained that she was very worried about Sam being a zombie. She said that 2 months ago their neighbor also became infected. Ultimately, their mother died. One morning, the woman left the house to find food for them. But not even a couple of minutes had passed before zombies surrounded her and ate her alive. Maria watched this with tears in her eyes. She could not even go out to help her mother. Clutching the photo to herself, the girl said that Anya was sleeping at that time and did not see that tragic scene. But Maria could not cope with her hatred of zombies. Then she repeated her request that they leave this house. Bowing her head, Jane replied that being a robot, she had no right to refuse a person. But before leaving, she asked Maria if she would like to listen to some interesting information. The interested girl asked what exactly the robot wanted to tell her. Jane said that if they went west, about 20 kilometers from here, they could find a barricade built by people, and there Maria and her sister could get help. She also said that she could take them there. It was difficult for the girl to believe her words. She replied that everything outside was crowded with zombies, and they would not be able to overcome such a long distance in such a situation. Jane just smiled, saying that she already had everything she needed to get to that place. Zombies wandered along one of the streets of the city, hoping to find a new victim. A sudden sound caught their attention and made them turn around. A moment later, a truck drove past them. Maria, clutching her sister in her arms, shouted at Jane to drive at a slower speed. But she replied that they should hold on even tighter because she intended to increase the speed. Thus, the truck rushed through numerous streets. Maria asked if everything would really be fine. Jane told her that she had calculated everything and there was no reason to worry. The robot girl turned to her and smiled, asking her to trust her. Suddenly, Maria pointed in front of her and shouted for Jane to look ahead. A lot of zombies were moving towards the truck. Jane told everyone to hold tight. The next moment, the truck increased its speed. The sisters, not used to this, screamed in horror. They rushed through the crowd of zombies with lightning speed. The zombies did not have time to react to the truck flying past them. Thus, they left there unharmed. Anya looked at Jane with admiration, saying that she drives a car very cool. Sometime later, they left the city. What Jane saw the next moment made her wary. The highway was strewn with cars that had driven into each other, with zombies wandering among them. Jane analyzed the situation and realized that there was not enough space on the road for them to pass safely. Maria told the robot girl to step on the gas and drive without stopping. She had no intention of sparing the monsters that ate people. Seeing that Jane was not reacting to her words, Maria ordered her to shoot down everyone who got in the way of the zombies. She did not move for a couple of seconds, wondering whether to carry out this order. Then she pressed the gas pedal. The truck was heading straight towards a crowd of zombies. Maria, overcome with rage, screamed for Jane to kill them all. But suddenly the truck changed its direction, turning to the side. A moment later, they broke through the guardrail, driving off the highway. The frightened sisters screamed in horror. Jane moved along the lumpy surface, leading them further away from the zombies. Dissatisfied, Maria asked why she did not follow her order. Apologizing, the robot girl replied that she could not follow orders that violated established laws. She recalled that according to the first article of the first law, robots cannot harm humans. When Maria objected that zombies were no longer people, Jane replied that no matter how much they had changed, to her, they were still people who needed help. Jane understood that the girl held a grudge against the infected people, but they were not to blame for being exposed to this disease. These people were only victims of one accident. After her words, Maria's gaze filled with rage again. The girl was angry that Jane had written off everything as just a simple accident. At the same moment, the truck turned, entering the road leading past another town. Maria barely held back her tears and said that she could not come to terms with the fact that their mother died due to some accident. She reached out to Jane to get some answers from her about what had happened. But suddenly a zombie appeared in front of them, attracting their attention. Jane began to twist the steering wheel to avoid hitting the zombies. Suddenly, the truck ran over a huge rock. A moment later, he tilted dangerously, freezing near the zombie. But not even a couple of seconds had passed before the truck turned over with a terrible roar and fell on its side. Those sitting inside were thrown aside. The zombies gradually began to surround the car, feeling their victims inside. When Maria opened her eyes, they saw through the glass many faces of monsters surrounding them. They did not give up their attempts to reach the victims. Assessing the situation, Jane asked the sisters to remain calm, but Maria interrupted her, saying that if she had followed her order, then this would not have happened. She doesn't care why these people became zombies. All that matters now is that they are monsters who eat other people. If they don't get rid of them, they will eventually become the same themselves. Sitting Sam back down, Jane replied that it was for this reason that she was looking for a cure for her master. Maria looked at her with confusion. The robot girl explained that if she manages to find a cure for this virus, then no one else will suffer. But Maria only laughed sadly, saying that these were just stupid hopes. Afterwards, Jane turned to her master with a request. She asked if he could protect the sisters for 8 minutes. Sam nodded his head affirmatively. After receiving his answer, Jane climbed out of the truck and rushed through the crowd. The zombies gathered at the entrance tried to get inside. Maria and Anya experienced real horror. The hero began to growl and push other zombies away. The girl was surprised that Sam was really trying to protect them. Suddenly, the truck began to rise. The girl screamed in fear again, and the surprised guy tried not to fall out of the front window. Jane managed to turn the truck over and lift it, thereby protecting her charges from the zombies. She shouted at Maria to fasten everyone's seatbelt. The girl, not understanding anything, sat looking around. Anya quickly came to her senses and fulfilled Jane's request, fastening Sam. The next moment, the truck was thrown over the top. Anya looked out the window in surprise. The truck hovered in the air, covering a long distance. Jane followed them along the ground. When the truck began to descend, she jumped up towards the truck. A few seconds later, Jane caught up with the truck. She supported the truck, softening its landing. The girls screamed in horror again, feeling that they were starting to fall. Having touched the ground, Jane tried to brake, still holding the truck. A few seconds later, she finally managed to stop. At the same time, behind the walls of the barricade, people did not stop monitoring the situation around them. Having received an urgent report, one of the employees actively knocked on the door of his boss's office, waiting for permission to enter. A few moments later, the man gave permission to enter, without raising his head from the numerous documents that littered his desk. When Justin asked what was going on, he was informed about the received surveillance images. His hand froze, pen in hand, right above the document when he heard a truck approaching the barricade, which belonged to a survivor from the contaminated area. Putting his pen aside, Justin reached for his glasses to take them off. He was interested in this survivor he had just been informed about. Jane got behind the wheel again, and now they continued on their way without obstacles in the form of zombies. She broke the silence in the car by turning to Maria. She turned away when Jane asked if Maria was angry with her. But then she turned around and replied that they all almost died, and Jane should have warned about what she was going to do. Anya interrupted her sister and smiled and said that she enjoyed it, as if they were riding a roller coaster. A few minutes later, a barricade finally appeared in front of them. Jane told her sisters that they were almost to the point where they could help them. When Anya pointed to the wall and asked what it was, Maria replied that it was the place where the soldiers were who could protect them. She said the days of sitting cooped up, afraid to go outside, and sharing leftover food would finally end. Anya looked at her sister with delight, asking if she could go to school now. The girl smiled and nodded, answering that now they can live the same way as before. Suddenly, they ran over something that made an unpleasant squeaking sound. The next moment, the sisters saw a bright light. The truck hit a mine and flew into the air. Trying to think of a way out of the situation, Jane knocked down the door on her side. She managed to get out of the truck, along with her master and two sisters, before the vehicle hit the ground. Jane landed on the ground, preventing her charges from getting hurt. Afterwards, she excitedly asked if everything was okay. Maria replied that she was fine. She was only hurt a little. The robot girl realized that they had run into a hidden mine. She looked around, scanning the area around her, and saw many mines located throughout the area. A sudden scream distracted her from further inspection. Maria, with tears in her eyes, bent over her unconscious sister, asking her to wake up. Seeing this, Jane ran up to them. The girl asked her what they should do now, but she asked Maria not to shake Anya and let her examine the wounds. Metal fragments reached the girl's stomach, making the situation much more dangerous. Turning towards the structure, Jane said that she would try to contact the people at the barricade, because there should be a doctor there. As soon as she said this, a bullet flew a centimeter away from her. After that, they were told through loudspeakers that they should all leave. If they dared to come closer, fire would be opened. Hearing this, Jane stood up, shielding her master and the girls. She asked not to shoot, because these people were survivors, and one of them needed the help of a doctor. She was told that this announcement was for temporary beings. Justin reported that a few months ago, one survivor had already been rescued, but in the end he was infected, and a couple of days later, an incident occurred that contributed to the rest of the surrounding areas being infected. It was from that day that the government established that all people in the affected areas would be marked as temporary beings, so now they have no right to let them in. Maria couldn't believe what she heard. She didn't want to believe that they had come such a long way in vain, risking their lives. She was filled with resentment, anger, and despair. Suddenly, she screamed for them to be let in, because it was too inhumane to do this to them. Observing this, Justin forbade calling anyone from the infected area survivors and treating them the same way they treat zombies. If they approached, it was ordered to open fire immediately. Suddenly, he was informed that a large number of zombies were approaching the barricade. Zombies flocked to the sound of an exploding mine that attracted them. It was established that they came from neighboring sectors. Justin immediately ordered everyone to take up fighting positions and be ready to fight. At the same time, Sam and Jane turned towards the approaching zombies. What was happening was completely beyond Jane's calculations. She could not believe that the soldiers would really leave them like that. Having regained her composure, she turned to Maria, saying that they needed to get out of here as soon as possible. In a quiet voice, the girl asked what would happen after they escaped from here. She had no idea where to go when zombies were roaming everywhere, and those who could help them refused to do so. Jane tried to calm her down, but the girl interrupted her, saying that everything they do is useless and they will all die in the end. The robot girl decided to bring her to her senses, reminding her of Anya's condition. If she does not receive help in time, she will definitely die. Hearing her name, the girl turned her head towards Jane, who was speaking. The zombie got dangerously close to her, but she did not notice this, expecting at least some reaction from Maria to her words. When two more zombies appeared behind her, Sam ran up to Jane, pushing them back. The robot girl shouted to Maria that she and her master would detain the zombies, so she should take her sister and run. Anya's eyes gradually lost their shine, but she looked at only one point. Suddenly, she asked her sister to turn around and look ahead. Maria hesitantly turned her head, looking where her sister was looking. The next moment, she froze in shock. Among the crowd of zombies, the girl saw her mother. Maria could not believe that in front of her was really her mother, who died before her eyes on that ill-fated day. The sisters froze, looking only at the figure approaching them. Suddenly, Anya smiled, saying that their mother had finally returned to pick them up. Overjoyed, the girl slowly rose to her feet. Maria came to her senses only when her sister headed towards the zombies. She screamed, trying to stop her, but Anya did not hear her and slowly walked into the deadly arms of her mother. She was really happy to see her mother, whom she had missed so much all this time. The girl did not see her as a threat until recently, even when the woman bared her sharpened teeth, leaning towards her neck. Maria screamed with all her might for her sister to leave there, realizing the danger looming over her. But it was too late, because the next moment their mother's teeth closed on Anya's neck, digging deep into her body. Seeing this, Maria, overcome with horror, jumped up from her seat and ran to her sister. At this moment, Jane turned her attention away from the zombie, looking back towards her sisters. She saw several more zombies approaching Anna. Jane immediately rushed to the girl's aid. A couple of seconds later, she was already holding back the pressure of the infected, who were attracted by the smell of blood, while Maria approached her sister. Kneeling down next to her mother, the girl tried to pull her away from Anya. She hoped that the woman would hear her words and stop. The girl tried to explain to her that now her own daughter was in front of her. But seeing that there was no reaction to her words, Maria broke into a scream and, with tears in her eyes, begged her to stop. But her mother only began to bite into Anya's neck more furiously. At that moment, the girl realized that by trying to reach her mother, she was only wasting time. Maria reached for the gun, which was not far from her. After that, she pointed the weapon at the woman's head. The girl screamed with tears in her eyes for you to go away. Other zombies were once again defeated in their attempts to reach their victims. Jane and Sam couldn't let them get to Anya and Maria. Suddenly, she heard Maria's screams. Turning around, Jane found a terrible scene. She saw Maria pointing a gun at her own mother, threatening to shoot if she didn't leave. At the same time, Justin was informed about the successful preparations for the attack. A couple of moments later, one of the girls told him that everyone was only waiting for his order. Justin watched what was happening and said that they needed to wait a little longer. He was interested in how the current situation would end. Maria's attention was attracted by Anya, who said that their mother had finally returned. But she replied that now it was not their mother, but a monster devouring people. Anya did not hear her sister's words, saying that she no longer hoped to ever see her again. Maria listened to her sister in bewilderment. When Anya turned to her sister, one of her eyes changed color to red, and red marks were spreading across her body. The girl seemed surprised to hear Anya say that despite everything, their mother was not a monster. She remembered Jane's words that all those infected were only victims of the current situation. Then Maria herself answered her that if they did not get rid of the zombies, they themselves would die. But Jane, no matter what, did not intend to give up trying to find a cure. Having rethought everything that had happened, the girl could not hold back her tears. She threw the weapon aside. After that, the girl called Jane and Sam. When the robot girl holding back the zombies turned around, Maria asked if she still intended to continue searching for a cure if Jane managed to find one. Then the girl asked to cure her family one day. Then she knelt down and hugged her sister and mother. Jane looked at this picture with sadness. A moment later, she promised that she would definitely heal them. Maria just looked at her gratefully and nodded. By this point, the virus had completely seized control of Anya's body. The girl reached for her sister's neck, intending to bite her. But at that very second, they were attacked from the barricade. Jane watched this, not having time to understand what had just happened. At the same time, the military reported that most of the zombies were within range of their weapons. A moment later, all the cannons installed around the perimeter were aimed at the crowd of zombies. At Justin's command, fire was opened and many zombies were hit. Sam dropped to his knees and, screaming, reached for the place where Maria and Anya had been a few seconds ago. The hero could not accept that his friends were destroyed in such a cruel way. Suddenly, Jane's protective dome appeared in front of him. The guy looked at her in surprise. He watched as she stepped forward, standing in the midst of many explosions from gunfire. Suddenly, one of the cannons aimed at her. At the same time, in the command center, Justin gave orders to his subordinates. He considered himself extremely lucky that these children had come to them, dragging a whole crowd of zombies with them, providing the perfect opportunity to get rid of them all in one fell swoop. The man suggested that at this rate, this area could be cleared much faster than they expected. Suddenly, alarms rang throughout the command center, and the color of the lights changed to a dull red. Justin asked what caused the alarm to activate, but the exact reason was not determined. A couple of moments later, he was informed that a very strong release of energy had occurred on the front line. The man asked to show him the camera footage. An image was immediately displayed on the screen, informing them that something was approaching them at great speed. By enlarging the image, everyone saw that it was just a domestic robot. At the same time, the man was conducting a report, reporting all the collected information to his superiors. One day, an ordinary household robot suddenly changed. And in just a couple of minutes, Jane was able to destroy an entire battalion of soldiers. After this, the 93rd Division sent military forces to get rid of it, but they were all defeated. Kevin reported that they asked a company that made home robots for advice, but they replied that they had never loaded this kind of ability into their robots. The man came to the conclusion that this robot is an updated custom model. It was also known that the place where she was last seen was the Western Barrier Point. It was there that Jane showed amazing abilities. She rushed forward through many explosions. Justin watched this in bewilderment, not understanding what this robot was doing. Suddenly, she began to gather all her strength into her fist. Jane was about to deliver a devastating blow. Approaching the wall, she hit it with her fist. From her blow, many cracks immediately appeared on the wall. A moment later, the cracks deepened, passing right through the wall. As a result of this blow, the headquarters shook, causing panic among everyone present. Justin ordered everyone to take refuge in an underground bunker. At the same time, the wall in front of Jane began to crumble. A couple of minutes later, the barricade collapsed, allowing her entry. Suddenly, she received requests for a video connection. After accepting the request, an image of an angry Justin appeared. He said that this barrier was the largest line of defense protecting the western region of the European district, and then asked Jane if she realized what its destruction would lead to. Without waiting for her answer, the man said that with such actions, she would put millions of people's lives in danger. Since this fact was a clear violation of the robot law, Justin ordered her to immediately switch off and stop functioning. But she replied that, like people, she simply protects what is valuable to her. Jane was determined to protect her master, even if she had to resort to such violations. Having said this, she ended the call and the image of the man disappeared. Afterwards, Jane approached her master to remove the protective dome. Helping him up, she told him they needed to move on. After looking around, the robot girl came to the conclusion that from now on this problem concerns not only them. And time after time, wherever they go, the same thing that happened to Maria and Anna will happen again and again. To put an end to this, Jane decided that she had to find a cure. Looking at the footage of her destroying an entire wall with just one blow, he said that this was far from an ordinary robot. They would view Jane as a weapon that openly opposed humanity. The man suggested sending several elite soldiers and getting rid of the upcoming threat in her person. The woman who listened to him replied that it was all quite interesting. She decided that they would stick to the strategy of the hunter watching his prey, so the operation to capture Jane would be too boring. At least a small problem would have to arise for the situation to become interesting. After that, she frowned and asked why she received all this data only now. Standing in front of her, Greg and his boss realized their mistake. The man, who is the commander of the 93rd Division of the Emergency Army, replied that they considered the matter to be a trifle for this report. Then he hesitated, and carefully choosing his words so as not to anger the girl even more, he said that this robot turned out to be a special case. After the situation had cleared up a little, they were going to provide a report, but were late due to scrupulousness. Listening to him, the girl raised her index finger. The next moment, Kevin received a bullet in the head. The shooter, Justin, said that the man missed his chance to survive. He hid because he was ashamed of being wounded by an ordinary house robot. If Kevin had immediately admitted this, he would only have received a demotion. Rising from her seat, Katarina said that this is only a problem for the military. If there are any problems, they should only think about the solution and not be busy, leaving the problems unnoticed. But she did not intend to tolerate their inaction any longer. Justin turned to her, asking what they should do with the sensational robot. She waved him off, answering that he should leave everything as it was for now. She didn't care about some kind of pile of scrap metal there. She then turned her attention to Greg, asking if he was the operational commander in the 315th sector. The excited man replied that he was an intelligence officer of the 93rd Division. She was interested in his words when he said that immediately after that incident, he reported this to the commander. But he said that it was a disgrace to their honor, and they should deal with this robot on their own. Interrupting him, Katarina lifted his chin, saying that Greg's face was too reserved, although his hair was a little messy. Afterwards, she displayed an image on the screen with a guy and a robot already familiar to him, and ordered him to tell about everything in detail that he managed to find out about this couple last time. Katarina placed special emphasis on Sam. She was interested in this boy, who, although he was a zombie, behaved completely differently than his other relatives. After many days, Jane continued to search for information about a medicine that could cure the infected. But no matter how much she searched, the information she needed related to this virus was nowhere to be found. One day she found one of the articles, the content of which she found difficult to believe. Currently, he and Sam were moving through the forest to their next destination. Jane helped wash her master, but he, as usual, actively resisted this process. She asked him not to twitch, because they found the river after many difficulties, and he must at least wash himself. Jane couldn't understand why Sam began to hate water so much after he became infected. After they broke through the barricade, about 20 days passed. They immediately went to the medical district to find a doctor who specialized in this virus, but it was completely turned into ruins. After that, they went on a search to another sector of the CDC to find at least some information. But here, Jane could not find any records related to the virus. She checked all the archives of the center, but there was no information left there. Jane assumed that someone had deliberately deleted all important data. Now she didn't know what exactly she needed to do. Having washed her master with difficulty, Jane collected her things and finally looked around. She noticed that after the disease appeared, the environment became better. Suddenly, her attention was caught by something flashing in the water. She did not understand why the water in the stream became cloudy. Turning her attention to the opposite bank, Jane noticed that someone was caressing clothes here. Taking a closer look, she noticed that it was a girl in a uniform resembling a medic. Erica noticed someone's presence. She looked up and saw Jane and Sam. At the same moment, she managed to confirm the model of the stranger. She established that this girl was a medical care robot. She also examined the uninvited guests carefully. A couple of moments later, she gathered her things and ran away from the river. Jane couldn't let someone connected to the CDC get away so easily, so she grabbed Sam and chased after the stranger. She hoped that this robot would have useful information about the virus for her. After several minutes of chasing, Jane ended up at someone's house. The robot girl stopped and put Sam on the ground, saying that their goal must be somewhere in this place. She opened the door of the house, asking if anyone was inside. But instead of answering, Jane heard the roar of zombies. An unfamiliar silhouette hanging over the screaming zombie asked him to lie still and not twitch. Sam and Jane watched this scene in surprise. Suddenly, the stranger felt someone else's presence in his house. Raising his head towards the guests, he irritably asked what they wanted here. Jane hugged the trembling master, trying to think of an appropriate response. The stranger's gaze lingered on the hero. Then he asked, still looking at Sam, if he had become infected with the virus that turns him into a zombie. Approaching them, the woman said that he was different from the others and asked permission to take a closer look at him. Jane looked at the approaching man in surprise, trying to get information about this woman. She was lucky that the woman's biography was registered in a central database that she could access. Suddenly, someone hit Jane on the back of the head with a hammer. When she turned around to find out who her offender was, she saw the girl she had met earlier. Jane said they had no bad intentions. They just wanted to ask something. After her words, the woman told Erica to stop torturing the guest. She concluded that they had nothing to do with the military. Having said this, Clarice asked to bring her a sedative. Jane turned to her master, saying that he need not worry, and the man standing in front of them was a doctor. She also added that this woman was the one who left a deep mark on history, achieving unprecedented achievements in medicine. A few hours later, it was already getting dark. Erica escorted a zombie whom Clarice had previously treated. The woman said that he hit his head on a rock on the bank of a stream, so she performed emergency surgery on him to repair a brain hemorrhage. The woman complained that due to the lack of antibiotics, she could not perform full-fledged operations, but since he was infected with a virus, he would survive without any medications. Taking a break from her story, Clarice again asked Jane why they had come to her. The robot girl replied that she was a house robot, and behind her was her master. She was glad that she happened to run into Clarice. The woman was surprised when the guest said her full name and previous position. When she asked in surprise how Jane knew her, she replied that she had found the information she needed in the central database. A few moments later, she brought up the image and read that Clarice had previously developed several vaccines for 10 infectious diseases as an expert in epidemiography and bacteriology. After which she hid the image and admitted that she did not even expect to meet the president of the medical association in such a place. The woman said doomedly that the robot's facial recognition system was still terrifying, even though her current image was very different from her previous one, after which she turned to Jane, suggesting that she had a lot of questions. Taking the liberty, she voiced the question that Jane thinks about most often, namely, why Sam manages to think straight and whether there is a way to recover from the virus. The robot girl looked at Clarice enthusiastically and confirmed her guess, saying that she was indeed looking for a cure. Jane shared the assumption that her owner has antibodies to the virus, and if Clarice can study it, then more accurate information about this can be found out. After listening to her, the woman scratched her head thoughtfully. Afterwards, she said that Jane should just give up because there is no way to cure this virus. The woman explained that this virus is not a disease. Jane was surprised to hear something like that and asked what it was. Clarice exhaled heavily. The robot girl said that they had come a long way here and asked the woman to tell everything she knew. At the same time, Katerina was drinking tea on board her ship. She praised the aroma of the tea, saying it suited her perfectly. Greg, who became her secretary, hesitantly turned to Katerina. He said that 2 days had already passed since she took the command ship for a sortie and recalled that Kevin asked her to tell him their destination from time to time. When the girl asked what the point of their appointment was if they couldn't enjoy a cup of tea without looking back, Greg asked what they would do if she was reprimanded. Katerina exhaled tiredly and said that he was saying very strange things after she saved Greg from being shot. Then she took off her glasses and looked at him irritably, asking a question about who, in his opinion, would dare to reprimand her. Then she exhaled and asked her to tell Kevin to just be on guard until he received his orders. Suddenly, she saw something in the glasses that caught her attention. Looking closer, she saw the same robot girl and her owner in the company of Clarice. Katerina was glad that they had finally made contact. At the same time, Clarice talked about how the virus is not a disease, but an evolution. Surprised, Jane asked what this was supposed to mean. The woman replied that it was similar to how a monkey evolved into a human. She explained that initially evolution would have taken 250,000 years, but now, due to some external interference, people are in a state of rapid development. Unreasonable aggression, loss of sanity, and increased physical capabilities are a few distinctive characteristics that appear only in the infected. But the most remarkable characteristic among all is that the infected can survive even without food. Based on the results of the research, it was established that zombies are superior to humans. Their cells are still in the process of dividing. Even if they do not eat, the infected continue to live. They do not attack humans because of their natural instinct to increase their species. Ultimately, Clarice came to the conclusion that curing this virus would be akin to turning a human into an ape. She explained that the reason Sam is able to maintain a modicum of sanity is not because he has antibodies, but rather he is simply a mutant. That's why Clarice said Jane should give up. Afterwards, the woman headed back to the house, saying that she should know the procedure for exterminating the infected around the world, and using this information, she should take Sam and hide, continuing to live where no one would find them. This is the best that Jane can do for her master. After listening to her, the robot girl suggested that perhaps this virus should be studied not from the side of pathology, but from genetic engineering and biotechnology. Jane said that they would head to the best research institute in Sector 23. After that, she bowed, thanking Clarice for the useful information. The woman asked her in bewilderment if she really was a robot, and if she was really not capable of doing calculations. Jane replied that she had checked everything several times since the beginning of their journey. She agreed that the probability of success was almost zero, and there was no way for an ordinary robot like her to do something that even a doctor like Clarice couldn't do. But Jane was not going to give up so easily, because she is the only family Sam has. Smiling sadly, she said that the best thing she can do now is not to hide, but to find hope. After her words, Clarice remembered her past when she was still working in the laboratory. One of her colleagues said that they are obliged to announce that the evolution of humanity is now happening, and they cannot correct it no matter what. But Clarice objected. They could not stop there, because this is where the best doctors from all over the world are gathered, and if they give up, then millions of people are doomed. Hearing her words, other workers came up, saying that if it was said that something was impossible, then that meant that it was impossible, period. None of her colleagues supported her. Clarice realized that she could not convince such a large number of people alone. Taking off her ID cards, she was informed that the result of the popular vote had been announced, and 97% supported the idea of a U-200 boy, U-200 be killing the zombies. Eventually, everyone left, leaving Clarice alone. Remembering this, the woman laughed. She said that a robot that truly cares about its owner should really be like that. Clarice apologized for her callousness, saying that she really wanted to see such determination again. Then she invited Jane to come inside, intending to show her something interesting. The robot girl followed Clarice along with her master. Entering the next room, they went down to the basement. Opening the door, the women entered her laboratory. Jane was surprised to see something like this here. The computers displayed information about numerous experiments, but they all failed. Jane studied everything in amazement. The woman said that she also thought that in order to defeat this virus, it needs to be studied through genetic engineering. She was not sure whether it was possible to change the genetic factor, but if she managed to revive the stopped brain using genetic treatment, then it would be possible to restore intelligence to the infected. The woman was confident that if their intelligence returned, then the infected would not be treated like pests. Patting Sam on the head, Clarice said that he could help her achieve this goal. She then turned to Jane, asking if she would trust her with her master. Seeing the doubt on her face, Clarice said that this child was the key that would help her complete her research. She assured Jane that she would definitely succeed and restore Sam's sanity. Having received her approval, the woman asked Erica to conduct a thorough examination of the guy. Encouraged, Jane asked Erica to take care of her master. She nodded and went to perform her duties. Seeing Jane's confusion, Clarice informed her that Erica's language system was broken, so she could not speak, and her expression of emotions was also severely limited. Then she headed towards the exit, calling Jane with her. Erica carefully watched her every step. As soon as she took Sam behind the screen, she immediately pounced on him, squeezing her fingers at his neck. She watched as the hero began to choke. A few moments later, Erica opened her fingers, letting go of Sam. As soon as he regained the ability to breathe, he began to gasp for air. With her head down, Erica stood over the guy like that for some time. Suddenly, she said something quietly, but Sam did not hear and looked at her in confusion. Raising her head, Erica repeated, telling them to get out of here. A week has already passed since that day. All this time, Clarice gave Sam her full attention. Every time Erica walked past him, he shuddered and looked at her fearfully. After several studies, Clarice said that Sam currently has the intelligence of a child of 6 years old. The suspected cause was determined to be that it has a genetic factor that can suppress evolved cells. Erica also made another discovery that amazed them all. She saw the possibility of a complete cure for the virus. Jane was happy because the chances of her dream coming true had increased significantly. When she approached the house, Sam came out at the same moment. Approaching, she said that today's inspection ended surprisingly quickly. But when Sam raised his head, she saw blood on his face. She immediately ran into the house and headed to the laboratory to find out what happened there. Jane covered the distance in the blink of an eye and burst inside. At that moment, she saw Erica supporting Clarissa lying on the floor, near whom there was a pool of blood. Jane ran up to them, asking what happened. Seeing the woman's face, she saw the familiar stripes gradually spreading throughout her body. The robot girl realized with horror that Clarice was infected. Sometime later, they moved her to the bed, after which Erica put on an IV, and Jane carefully wiped off the blood. Breaking the silence, she asked when Clarice started getting infected. She was worried that it might have happened because of her and Sam. Hearing an incomprehensible sound in response, Jane turned towards Erica. A moment later, tuning into another wavelength, Jane was able to understand these signals. Erica said that Clarice had been infected about 70 days ago. The woman did not want to give up her research and continued to conduct it, suppressing the infection with incomplete treatment. But even so, she has already reached her limit. Suddenly, Erica asked her and Sam to leave soon, to give Clarice the opportunity to rest at least the time she had left. Jane hung her head sadly as she thought about her words. Afterwards, she said that she understood the current situation, and it would really be wrong if they continued to stay here. Having said this, she and Sam bowed, Jane thanking them for their help. Suddenly, Clarice grabbed Sam's hand. Jane looked in surprise at the awakened woman, who was struggling to get into a sitting position. Clarice said that she was finally able to find the right path in research and asked where they were going to go. Then she collapsed back exhausted. It was obvious that the woman was in great pain. Reaching out to Erica, Clarissa said that she wanted to continue her research and asked her to help her get up. But she did not budge. The woman repeated her request again, but more demandingly. But Erica again ignored her request. Exhaling in disappointment, she said that she had been wandering in the dark for a long time, conducting numerous studies. She admitted that she was ready to give up many times. But one day Sam appeared, and for Clarice, he became the last hope. She looked at Erica, saying that right now she had unfinished business that was much more important than her life. Clarice again asked to help her get to the laboratory. But Erica again had no intention of complying with this request, so Jane decided to do it instead. The woman thanked her for her help. She just shook her head, looking at her with regret. Erica was unhappy with this action of Jane. When they were alone, she gave her a hard slap. Jane said that she was well aware of the reason for Erica's anger. She said that it was not her selfishness in favor of her master. Jane helped Clarice because she understands what she was experiencing all this time. Jane assumed that Clarice was very upset by the constant failures, and she was also under the stress of being infected. The robot girl said that she knows too well how difficult it is to fight against everyone alone. She was confident that Clarice would not stop, no matter what difficulties stood in her way. Jane said that if they could see just a glimmer of hope, they would both move forward no matter what. That's why Erica won't be able to hold them back. She looked at Jane in surprise. When she finished speaking, Erica lowered her head, biting her lip. The next moment, she said that Jane knew absolutely nothing. She asked what kind of end people like them would face. Jane froze in surprise. Clarice talked about how Erica's language system was broken, and she couldn't speak. Jane asked why she had been hiding her ability to speak all this time. Erica just looked at her with hostility. At the same time, Clarice injected herself with an injection that could briefly delay the spread of the virus in her body. Once the medicine was administered, she sighed heavily and leaned back in her chair. The system informed her of the results of another experiment on cerebral gene activation. The woman couldn't believe her own eyes when she personally read the results. Suddenly, Erica received a signal and was distracted from her conversation with Jane. Then, clutching her head, she quietly said that this should not have happened. Jane didn't understand when Erica suddenly rushed back into the house. She followed her, trying to find out the reason for her strange behavior. Once inside, the girl saw Clarice, overcome by another coughing fit, and Sam standing next to her. They approached her, asking if everything was okay. But instead of answering, Clarice took her hand away from her mouth and pointed at the monitor. The girl sitting next to her froze and looked at the monitor in surprise. The last experiment carried out was successful. Jane was incredibly happy because she had a chance to heal her master. Eliza was also amazed that Clarice still managed to accomplish what had recently seemed impossible. The woman looked at Sam, saying that all the answers to what was happening were in him. She thanked him. Then she said that her time was coming to an end. Clarice reached out to Erica, saying she wanted to ask her for one thing. But she looked at the monitor, not paying attention to those around her. The woman called her several more times. Without turning around, Erica said that from now on, all this data is code blue. Everyone froze in surprise as they listened to Erica continuously repeat code blue. Clarice was most amazed by what was happening. She asked how it was possible that Erica had the ability to speak. Suddenly, Erica said her mission was accomplished. When the woman heard the name the girl had just called, Katerina received information from Erica about Clarice's discovery. The girl did not doubt her genius abilities. She stood up from the table, putting her glasses aside. She said that if they catch a zombie capable of maintaining their sanity, they will be able to achieve unprecedented heights. After that, she and Greg headed for the exit, saying that their vacation was over. Entering the control room, Katerina ordered everyone to prepare for takeoff. Taking her place, she told Kevin that they would be using the same weapon and asked him to hurry up and prepare it. But the man asked confusedly why she was going to use it. She had no intention of explaining to him and told him to simply carry out her order. Kevin said that in order to use these weapons, they need the approval of the president, so he will immediately seek his approval. Smiling, Katerina replied that her order was enough. She would simply provide a detailed report at the end. The man had no choice but to follow her orders. After this, he informed everyone that they would be using Mars and gave orders to begin preparing it immediately. The ship was approaching Clarice's house at high speed. Jane sensed danger approaching. She stood up abruptly, telling everyone that enemies were approaching them. The woman was surprised that their location was discovered so quickly. Jane told everyone to stay here while she fought and ran towards the exit. Clarice tried to stop her, shouting that it was too dangerous for her to approach the military. But she was seized by another coughing fit. Erica sat down next to her, offering her a glass of water. The woman asked the reason for her action. She just looked down sadly. At this time, Jane had already run out into the street. Looking up, she stopped. Jane noticed an approaching ship. After checking all the data, she discovered an unusual structure on it and established that it was a new type of military weapon, about which there was no information. The robot girl activated her body's power-up. She was determined to stop the enemy no matter what. The next moment, Jane jumped into the air towards the ship. In a few leaps, she was right in front of him. The weapon was already fully loaded and aimed at her. A moment later, a shot was fired. Jane realized that Clarice's research was the hope for all humanity, so she was obliged to protect her. Putting her hands in front of her, she created a protective barrier. The moment Jane appeared in their field of vision, the image from the cameras was transferred to the screen. Katerina's expectations were confirmed. It was obvious that the safety of the owner was paramount for this robot. Then she ordered Mars to be activated. Jane managed to create a large energy barrier. Katerina wondered if this robot could survive an attack from Mars. While in the laboratory, Sam, Erica, and Clarice heard loud noises outside. When the energy charge approached Jane, she covered herself with a barrier, not allowing it to pass further. With every second, more and more damage appeared on her body. She made a mistake in her calculations and realized too late that she was not able to contain such a large amount of energy. A few seconds later, there was a powerful explosion. At that moment, Clarice walked outside with Erica and Sam. She didn't understand what kind of light it was. When the bright flash from the explosion faded, the unconscious Jane flew down. Her body fell a few meters from the house. She did not respond to their screams, and small currents passed through her hands. Frightened, Sam and Clarice rushed to her. On the screen, you could see the boy lowered himself near the body of his robot. Kevin couldn't understand how an ordinary robot managed to stop a bomb that could destroy an entire mountain belt. Getting up from her seat, Katerina said that all robots are designed the same way as super soldiers. The girl suggested that today they could get more useful information. Turning to Kevin, she said that the most important skill of a commander is accuracy in assessing enemy capabilities. Then she ordered the hatch to be opened because they were going down. At the same time, Clarice and Sam sat next to Jane's motionless body, hoping to get at least some reaction from her to their voices. Suddenly, a huge shadow loomed over them.